So really the agenda for today, just define what dynamic and static pipelines are, the benefits to them, and then the architecture of when you would use pipelines, the benefits to it, and all the different strategies for your pipelines. So really quick, the definition or the difference between a static and a dynamic pipeline is a static can really only perform one function at a time, where a dynamic pipeline can perform multiple functions at a single given point in time. So really enabling that automation process and eliminating a lot of those manual steps for you. Some of the benefits to those, your development teams are able to be more agile, more flexible. With that automation, you can deliver new features to users faster. And with Flowsum, it's a stable operating environment and then faster resolution time for your production problems. So that'll be like a hotfix release or a hotfix pipeline, which we're going to get into. So switching to the next slide. If you've sat on my demos before, this is a very, very basic app dev flow. So by no means is this concrete. This can definitely be adjusted per development team's requirements and their processes. So I want to somewhat avoid branching strategy today, but branching strategy and pipelines go hand in hand. There's definitely best practices for a branching strategy within Flowsum. With pipelines, they're very flexible, and there's really no right or wrong answer. It's how your development team wants to get those releases to production. So a good example here, with some of our smaller customers or mid-size, they're doing production releases multiple times a day. So with that pipeline, maybe they don't have a hang up in like the sit environment or QA. And once that has like the QA approvals, they can individually push each branch to production. That's definitely feasible. Now for the larger customers that really have their approval processes that, static code analysis, peer code review, QA testing, a lot of times those individual feature branches, there could be a pipeline to a sit environment. It hangs out there until they have all their approvals. And then you could merge that into a release where another pipeline's activated. So today, I really want to walk through the different kinds of pipelines you can have, how much you can automate. We can talk about back promoting, and then really simple ones, and I can help you build them out as well. So with that being said, I'm going to hop into the demo today. So I'll walk through all the different pipelines I've configured in my org, and then we can actually kick one off eventually. So switching to Flowsum here. One thing to note is once you build the pipelines, these are reusable time and time again for every single branch. So if we're on my 915 feature branch here, we can click Run Pipeline. You're going to see a list of all of my available pipelines here. So maybe I were to deploy this to QA. Maybe it goes through the approval processes. I could then kick off my UAT and production one with the exact same branch. So saving dev teams a lot of time. Now, as far as what exactly these pipelines do and how I configure them, that's going to be over in the Pipelines tab. A good example of a very flexible one, which this hotfix pipeline might not be used for all teams, or this could be very specific. With this hotfix, and the way Flowsum works is if desired, you could take a hotfix from your development sandbox all the way to production. So skipping those lower orgs, if desired, and if you have the right permissions to do so. So how I've configured this is I would want to take that branch straight from my dev sandbox all the way to production. And if the validate is a success, automatically deploy. The question always comes into play then, if you skip those lower orgs, how does QA, how does InDev, how does SIT, how do they get those changes back in their environments to make sure everything's in sync? A pipeline can accomplish that. So if I were to do a successful deployment to production, I would then back promote to QA and then integrated dev. On the flip side, maybe you just want to do a straight validate and deploy to production. Pause there, make sure the business confirms it. You could have a totally separate pipeline for doing a back promotion to QA and integrated dev. So that is very flexible. I do want to flash a more complicated one I have, and this could be a future state for a lot of teams. This is how we really integrate with external testing tools, and it's going to be webhooks. So for my UAT and production one here, again, just a simple validate and deploy. But after the deployment to QA, we actually use webhooks, which is going to be discussed in another Dev Tech Talk. We can use webhooks to make that call out to testing tools like Selenium, Provar, for example. And if those test scripts complete, or my regression testing does, then you can continue on the process for production. If those test scripts were to fail, you would definitely want to roll back that deployment, because that'd be a good indication there's some bugs in your code. So all of these steps could be done manually, but a pipeline is a great way to automate them, save some clicks, and save some time for the team. One additional one that I did want to review before I actually kick off a pipeline is going to be the back promotion one. So there's multiple ways you can back promote. A lot of teams will opt to do this manually. So if the release branch, I'm going to switch to this slide really quick. So maybe this release branch made it to production. There's really 3 ways you can back promote. One, you can keep reusing that same release branch and do a manual deployment backwards, which definitely solves your use case. The second one is you could build a pipeline. So maybe this release branch made it to production. You could kick off a pipeline from the release branch to say, just back promote everything to all 20 developer sandboxes. If teams want the ultimate automation for back promoting, you can also tie a back promotion pipeline to the repository. And this will mean that every time you commit a branch to the repository, it's going to automatically kick off that back promotion pipeline. So if devs don't want to spend the time resolving any conflicts or manually doing it, you can tie that. And how you can do so within Flowsum, I'm going to switch back over in the settings tab. With the repository here, the default is what I use as my master branch for my trial org. But down below here, you can see the pipeline. So here, if I wanted to kick off my back promotion, that would mean every time I commit to this repo, this pipeline is automatically executed, and it's going to push those changes back to my dev 1, dev 2, dev 3 orgs. So that is an option for users. Any questions with the pipelines I've showed so far? If not, I can start building out a pipeline to show you really how simple it is. All right, so with that being said, throughout this talk today, I did want to show the teams how to build out a pipeline. So here you can click new, and the only real requirement for this is just give it a unique name. So I give it. Down below, there are 3 options for you. So here you could deploy the entire profile. So whether than a Git profile, which is a partial profile deployment, this would force the profiles to deploy that entire XML. There's use cases for it, but ideally you're going to want to leave that unchecked by default. The next one is going to be a full deploy. So this means that if you keep reusing that same branch again and again, maybe you commit a new component to it. Leaving this unchecked is only going to deploy those new components. It's not going to try and deploy all the old ones that were already deployed. Use cases for both, but again, for good reason, this is left unchecked by default. And then manual. This means that you can't automatically kick off a pipeline. It would need to be a manual kickoff. A good use case for this is like a back promotion one. So if you were to tie this pipeline to a repository, it wouldn't automatically execute because it needs to be manually kicked off. So again, for good reason, that's left as manual. So if we click save here, you can see on the right-hand side that our pipeline diagram is going to be blank because we haven't added any pipeline steps yet. So in order to add your pipeline steps, you can click on this related list or this one up here. Both ways get you to the same spot. So I can hover over this link right here and click new. For this example, I can keep it pretty simple and I'll just add maybe 2 steps. So when you configure a pipeline, you can think of this almost as like if-then statement. So if this passes, then what? If it fails, then what? Using a lot of other competitor tools, this usually takes deep domain knowledge. With Flowsum, it's really just basic configuration where we enable anyone on the dev team or admin team to complete a pipeline for their use cases. So here for the operation, you can really do 4 actions. A deploy, a validate, a rollback, which is really only going to be used maybe if your regression testing using webhooks fails. Again, webhooks, I kind of want to avoid that today because we'll get into that at a later time, but webhooks can always be configured over here in the settings tab. And that's how we can make the call out to those tools. So for today, I'll just do a simple validate and deploy. And we'd say if we want to validate the target org, we'll take this to my dev2 org. And then for the developers on the phone, whether you're kicking off a manual validate or deploy or a pipeline, you can always define what tests you want run during your deployment. So you could run all tests, which could take a little bit of time, or just run the specified tests included in the branch. So those options are always available through automation too. But if this validate to dev2 passes, we would want to move on to step 2. If that validate to dev2 fails, we'd want that deployment to stop. There's no way that the deployment would be successful, but if the validation fails, you still get that email notification with your Salesforce errors. So if the validate to dev2 passes, we then want to deploy to dev2. And then if that deployment passes, great, our deployment worked. If it fails, that's still bad, but you'll get the error message with the Salesforce notifications and you can retry when you're ready. In conclusion, this is a very, very simple pipeline, but really there is no limit on to how many steps you can add or really how much you can automate. Again, a lot of teams will have different pipelines for each step in their process. So maybe a pipeline to QA, they run through all their approvals, then they kick off another pipeline. This is a very extreme example, but if desired, you could take a branch all the way from development all the way to production with one pipeline. Again, a little extreme, but technically, is it feasible? Absolutely. So with that being said, I'll click Save Steps. And here you can see on the right-hand side that Flowsum did build out that diagram for you. I might be a little biased, but I think it's a lot easier to look at this little process builder type view than look at the pipeline steps and kind of read through them wondering what's going to happen. So again, just to reiterate, the pipelines tab is where you're going to configure them. And as your team grows and users have different uses, you're always free to build out list views for them. So maybe Jason has one set of pipelines that only he wants to execute. Gene could have a separate set. So now that we've built one, let's kick off a pipeline. So over here in the branches, this is where you're actually going to initiate a pipeline. And I'll use this 915 feature branch here. Now I've already run the impact analysis against my target org to make sure nothing's going to be overwritten. Let's pretend for this use case, I've passed my static code analysis. My peers have approved my code. Now I can deploy to integrated dev, for example. So I can click Run Pipeline. And this will take a minute or two to work through the process. When we click Run Pipeline, the important thing I want to note here, before a manual deployment, and if you have a deployment in your pipeline, Flowsum automatically takes that backup of your target org. So before any deployment, we'll always take a snapshot of the components that are about to be changed. Just in case if you ever need to roll back, this is going to be an automated process for you. You really never need to worry about that in Flowsum. But with pipelines, similar to a manual validate and deploy, these will always be logged under that deployment history tab. So here we can see that pipeline is currently in progress. There's that little refresh button up here too. If you've updated your user's email to your own personal one, you get email notifications every step of the way. So you'll get an email notification that the validate was a success. And then if that deployment fails or succeeds, you still get that notification. So any questions so far around the process, configuring the pipelines or functionality of them while we wait for this to complete? In the meantime, while we wait for this, if this validate were to fail for whatever reason, you can always click on this metadata log name here, and that's going to have your Salesforce errors or your Salesforce successes. So down below here, since that validate was a success, the error log is going to be null. But if you click on the success log, you can always see exactly what's been created, updated. And here it looks like my 2 fields had no change, but everything else was updated as part of that deployment. So an easy way, if you're checking the metadata logs, is click the details. And this is going to be a lookup field right back to your branch. Back to deployment history, and we can track that progress again. So to save some time here, I'm very confident the deployment will be a success since the validate did succeed. But let's say this went to integrated dev. Jean goes through QA testing. She finds no bugs in my deployment. And if I wanted to merge to a branch, absolutely could. But if I want to take this branch to maybe QA next, again, you can keep reusing the same branches time and time again. So it's always best practice to run an impact analysis against the target org before deploying. Let's just say I did that. You could kick off a different pipeline using the same exact branch. So if I want to take this to QA next, I could initiate this pipeline as well. For this demo thing, I'm not going to initiate that QA pipeline, but just know that process is exactly the same time and time again. No matter where you are in the process, you can use a different pipeline and take you to those orgs. If this went to production, we could kick off that back promotion pipeline to push everything backwards to my peers' dev sandboxes.